Welcome to 189.16, The Scream. Caller, you're talking to Forrest Nash. What's going on with you tonight?
What? No! Look, I found a body and I need your help.
Art styles, mechanics, graphical fidelity, or maybe just being the next entry in a series that you've come to love, there are plenty of reasons for a game to stand out amongst the near infinite amount of releases nowadays. But sometimes the simplest reason is just one hell of a concept, one solid idea. And for Team 17's 2023 release of Killer Frequency, that was exactly what caught my attention. And yes, that Team 17, you know, the guys behind those Worms games and co-developers of Overcooked 2. But despite this team's usual output, with Killer Frequency, they have moved firmly into the realm of 1980s themed and slasher movie inspired horror. And as for the concept that caught my attention, you experience this horror story through one of the more original vantage points that I've ever seen in a game. Killer Frequency, you play as late night radio DJ Forrest Nash. You answer phone calls, spin a bizarre collection of retro and synthwave records, and I'll explain why that feels so strange in a bit. You run ads, bicker with your producer and sound engineer, and then you also have the choice of shooting 3-pointers with crumpled up paper balls into a trash can across the room. And that's pretty much what you do, at least in the beginning of this experience. Forrest Nash is new to this particular radio station, KFAM, otherwise known as 189.16 The Scream.
Welcome to 189.16, The Scream. Caller, you're talking to Forrest Nash.
A humble little operation out in the boonies of Iowa in a town called Gallows Creek. Forrest was recently stationed here after some sort of falling out with his last radio station, a much larger operation back in Chicago, which made him something of a household name in the past.
Oh.
How many did you get before? You know.
Before my career exploded and I ended up on a midnight hour talk show in the town of 1,000 people?
Yeah, before that.
Around 5 for most shows on the low end. Big gas could pump that up to 10, 15, easy.
5,000 on the low end? We could only dream of that.
5 million.
We are never given the exact reason for our DJ's fall from grace, but this little bit of backstory essentially serves to place us in the shoes of a talented radio personality, but also to silo him off in this backwater town, where he, like the player, is learning the lay of the land on the fly. And Forrest is not exactly a fan of his new digs. The advertisers,
"Come on down to Ponty's Pizza this weekend! You've just got to pay for one slice to get yourself..."
God damn it, you're just calling in to advertise your shop. Peggy, hang up on him.
the callers,
"Maybe you must make a sacrifice to us."
A sacrifice? To us?
I mean, me.
pretty much everything and everyone aside from his producer Peggy Weaver. Forrest seems to treat everything around him with a detached sort of resentment that gives away the fact that our DJ views this whole change of scenery as beneath him.
Peggy, what do you mean play the tape? I used to have a tape guy do that for me.
You're not in Chicago anymore, Forrest. Here in Gallows Creek, you get to be your own tape guy.
But this is not a game about a sour disc jockey failing to adjust to his new career trajectory. Instead, a cold opening sequence makes sure that the player fully understands the tone that this game is going for. In this scene, you play as an unnamed character as they make their way through a rundown alley on their way to the same broadcast studio where the game proper takes place, even though you should fully understand who this is by the time that you finish the game. Flickering lights and some creepy ambient sound effects quickly clue the player into the fact that something very wrong is going on around them. But you do eventually make it inside unscathed. That is before this sequence plays out. And our unnamed player character gets got by a masked killer. That is ultimately what Killer Frequency is about. You play as Forrest Nash to be sure, but you are broadcasting as a violent string of attacks and murders are going on in the town of Gallows Creek around you. And while that would be an interesting enough concept in and of itself, things escalate quickly when one of the calls you take during your broadcast comes from a police dispatcher.
Leslie, I'll level with you. I find this hard to believe, but I'll hear you out. What exactly is going on?
Sheriff Matthews is dead.
What? Sheriff Matthews is dead?
I couldn't get any response from the department.
This call spells out a pretty grim situation. There is a killer on the loose, and as the game progresses, we learn that this is a local serial killer known simply as the Whistling Man. And I know, it's a little stupid, but I'll explain why this name does and doesn't work in a bit. We learn that this killer had originally attacked Gallows Creek nearly 2 decades before, with the original assailant being long assumed dead. But Leslie, our police dispatcher on the other end of the line, has recently just come face to face with the man. And in this sequence that acts as something of a tutorial, we guide Leslie through her encounter and offer her advice to escape her attacker, before she is ultimately able to make her escape, as well as save the life of another incapacitated police officer.
It looks like whoever attacked her threw the keys into the cell after they locked the door.
Is there any way you can reach the keys?
No. There aren't any bars to the cell, and the door itself only has a food tray slot. And that's too narrow for me to reach through.
There's gotta be another way in.
There's gotta be another set of keys somewhere in that office. Those can't be the only ones.
Of course. Yes, there must be another set.
Where might another set be?
With this sequence ultimately ending with her fleeing the town to get help. And this is where we have to suspend a little bit of disbelief, as this is one of those situations that really just does what it has to in relation to the plot in order to get the game and its conceit moving along. Leslie, earlier in our call with her, lets us know that all the phone lines going out of Gallows Creek are not working, with her stating that something was wrong with the line. That is, even though she was more than able to call into the radio station, with the justification being that calls in Gallows Creek work just fine. It's just when you change the area code that things fall apart. Fuck it, it's stupid. But it does set up a fun situation for gameplay, so we're just gonna sweep all that bullshit under the rug for now. Leslie also notifies us that this little town only has 3 police officers, with the sheriff now dead, 1 on vacation, and now with the final one incapacitated in the back of her getaway vehicle. She is driving like a bat out of hell to the next town over to get help, and again, suspension of disbelief, it is going to take several hours for her to get to the next town and back, effectively leaving Gallows Creek without any emergency line to call if they find themselves in danger. And that is where Forrest comes in. Before Leslie left for help, she rerouted the 911 phone lines to patch directly into KFAM's call-in system, effectively making the player a 911 operator, call-in personality, and retrowave DJ. And it is at this point where the game really opens up. You continue on with the night's scheduled programming by playing music, fielding calls, playing ads, but occasionally someone will call in thinking that they've dialed for the police, only to end up live on the air with Forrest Nash.
Hello, caller. You're live on the Scream with me, Forrest Nash.
What? I dialed 911. I need the sheriff right away.
Okay, right. Well, I'm filling in for 911 tonight. What's your name and what's your trouble?
And from here, things play out similarly to how they did with Leslie, only there are more than a few wrinkles to keep things interesting. Each caller is currently being attacked by the Whistling Man, with him stalking around in the shadows behind them. And each of these callers presents Forrest with a predicament on how they should best go about escaping. But where Leslie's call always ends with a clean escape, each of these calls has some real stakes to them, as any wrong move or faulty information that you give these potential victims could result in their untimely death.
Hello, you're live on 189.16, The Scream.
Forrest, it's the Whistling Man. He's at the door. He's... Oh my God. It's you, isn't it? Clive, I didn't talk.
All of these scenes act as something of a puzzle, whether it be helping jazz runner Sandra Sharp hotwire a car to make her getaway. Oh, and this game takes place in 1987, by the way, in case the neon aesthetics and studio equipment didn't make that too clear, but again, more on that later. Or situations like helping a newspaper editor navigate his besieged office building using nothing but a crudely drawn floor plan that was faxed over to the radio station during this attack. Or, in one particularly tense call, helping a survivor stop the bleeding of a recently stabbed friend.
This is Forrest Nash, and you're listening.
Please help me. My name is Casey Moore. I'm at 25 Nancy Drive. My best friend's been stabbed. He's bleeding everywhere. I don't know what to do. Please help me.
All of these scenarios play out in a relatively similar way. You get a call, identify the situation, talk to Peggy, and then come up with a plan to help each one of these would-be victims as they try to escape. In the case of Sandra Sharp, that requires exploring the KFAM studios until you find a magazine that belongs to another one of the station's hosts. In this case, an automotive repair call-in show, and this magazine just so happens to have a 2-page spread detailing the finer points of hot wiring your car in meticulous detail. Again, don't think about it too hard, or you're going to be able to poke holes through these scenarios to the point where they all just feel pretty ridiculous. But where the scenarios might lack grounding, I have to admit, at least in a few cases, there is a certain tension that comes across loud and clear with each one of these puzzles. First, the voice acting in this game is fairly convincing for an indie title, and it definitely elevates the stakes of each one of these calls. Josh Cowdery does a terrific job as Forrest, and the rest of the supporting cast is just as good. There are definitely some odd line readings to be sure, but most of the time I felt like that was at the fault of the voice director and the writers more than the actual talent.
God. Listen, you've got to help me then. I drove to the edge of town for a jazz run, and now some psycho dressed like the Whistling Man is after me, knife in hand.
Oh God, it's actually happening.
Where are you now? Did you escape to somewhere safe?
Oh, I did, baby. I jazz ran all the way to my car and nothing flat. But I dropped my keys somewhere along the way. I never locked the door, at least I've got a place to hide, but I can't get moving. Look, I don't know a thing about cars, but I gotta start this engine without the keys, and you're gonna have to help me.
Wait, I don't...
If it helps, I've got a toolkit buried beneath my spare sweatbands. I'll call you back when I find it.
But again, I'll expand upon that in a bit. Second, the Whistling Man, which again just sounds silly whenever people call him that out loud, as that name hardly inspires dread. However, in the context of these phone calls, situations where your imagination is ultimately filling in the gaps as a terrified caller on the other end is trying their best to overcome the sheer panic of being hunted down, yeah, I don't know, in that context, what is ostensibly an audio drama, as you frantically look over all relevant information trying to aid each potential victim, suddenly the Whistling Man's trademark tune takes on a far more sinister tone. And hearing a panicked caller suddenly stop in their tracks just to hear a faint,
Is there anywhere else you can go? Do you have any friends nearby?
Oh, I'm not going back out there.
well, for me at least, this was pretty effective stuff. But Killer Frequency is in a strange spot when it comes to tonal consistency. Certain phone calls ratchet up the dread to be sure, and the lack of any save files means that as soon as this game autosaves between decisions, you're locked in. Save scumming will not save your callers, and even this mechanical choice really adds to the tension, essentially giving every phone call the same weight as that one Life is Strange sequence in which Max had to talk Kate back from the edge after losing her powers. But whenever a call ends, whether it be after successfully saving someone or hearing their grisly death from the other end of a telephone line, there is always this bizarre shift in tone as soon as the calls hang up. I stated this before, but this role of 911 dispatcher is really only something that Forrest is doing on top of his normal shift as a DJ, and the writers really try to keep Forrest locked into his paid role whenever these calls end. Like, seriously, what could be more tonally inappropriate than, well, this?
Then step into Master Robbie's deadly dojo of Kung Ra-Te and receive direct by video warrior instruction from me, Master Robbie.
Someone was just being attacked on a live broadcast, but now, back to our paid sponsors. And this whiplash is felt everywhere. Killer Frequency is not a horror game in which the stakes are constantly rising and the game is always trying to freak you out. Instead, it is a campy Stranger Things type interpretation of a 1980s slasher flick, with your gameplay ultimately boiling down to a walking simulator that is occasionally being punctuated with puzzles that wouldn't feel too far removed from Steel Crate Games' Keep Talking and No One Explodes, with that particular title acting like an interactive version of every Hollywood don't cut the red wire bomb disposal scene that's ever graced a B-tier action flick. But where that game created tension between two players, with one staring at the screen with a bomb's timer ticking down in front of them and the other frantically flipping between the pages of a bomb defusal manual as the two players try to decipher the puzzle that was in front of them, here in Killer Frequency, you only play the support role. So even when the game does open up and lead the player deeper into the studio to scrounge for intel, you never really feel the dread, no matter how many flickering lights or retro wave aesthetics are thrown your way. And at least for me, while I explored this space littered with video nasty VHS covers, knockoff Fangoria magazines, and out-of-order arcade cabinets, I was struck with a familiar wave of hauntological anxiety that I had only previously felt while playing Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach. Like that game and Stranger Things before it, Killer Frequency, while it is set in the 80s, it is only representing that time period through the most shallow understanding of the era. And ultimately, this game represents more of a synthwave or retrowave aesthetic than anything that feels like it would have ever existed in real life. And in a lot of ways, Team 17 kinda missed the mark when it came to environmental design. Your radio show is called The Scream, better make sure that there's a bunch of vaguely 1980s slasher influenced set dressing strewn about the place. They wanted to have a game with an 80s aesthetic, well, make sure everything is neon, even the windows opening out to the fluorescent night sky. It's fine, but between Stranger Things, Hotline Miami, and even Far Cry Blood Dragon, this vibe has been done to death, and it has been done better for over a decade now. And even with the records that Forrest spins between attempted murders, these tracks, while admittedly solid enough and vibey enough in their own right for original music made for this game, what is this music that Forrest is actually playing? If he were a DJ in the 80s, sure, he would be playing all sorts of tracks with bright synth leads. But this particular iteration of electronic instrumental music is firmly rooted in the retro and synthwave scene, a genre and subgenre dominated by acts like Perturbator and Carpenter Brute. You know, the artists that made Hotline Miami's brand of 2D fuck-em-up gameplay really come to life. But even those styles of music were born from house musicians in the mid to late 2000s, responding to cultural touchstones like Grand Theft Auto Vice City and watching DVD re-releases of John Carpenter movies. No, this is not the 1980s. This is the neo-1980s that is being represented here. And that's all well and good, but it did stop me from being anchored into any particular time period with this title, essentially making the grounding feel that much more flimsy, with the world of Killer Frequency instead feeling like a bizarre commodification of the era more than anything. And this commodification also serves to undermine the writing in this game as well. Like, what do you think of when you think of the 1980s? Surely it's things like jazzercise, roller rinks, synthesizers. I mean, come on, man. I get that camp is something that has always had a home in horror. Killer Clowns from Outer Space, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, and even more contemporary examples like Cabin in the Woods.
Fuck you! Fuck you! Fuck you! Fuck you! Fuck you! Fuck you!
But when you reduce your characters to simple stereotypes and tropes, it has always and will always make it so that the tension just dies on the vine. Because why the hell would you care if any of these cartoon characters actually survives? And Sandra Sharp keeping survival tools stored in her sweatbands, I mean, I can just hear the O and J. But as much as it might sound like I am shitting on some of this game's presentation, and I am, it is really because of how it undermines the real strengths of this game. These phone calls and these puzzles and the trappings of being stuck in a studio unable to physically help these people as they reach out to you in their most desperate moments. It's an amazing concept. And there is a truly incredible version of this game that was just a few design choices away from becoming an instant classic. In reading up on this game's development while making this video, I stumbled upon Game Design Hour's interview with lead producer Christopher Chester and designer and writer for Killer Frequency, John Lappin. And in this interview, I learned that this game began its life as an entry in Adventure Jam, an itch.io game jam where a small splinter group from Team 17 worked on an early version of Killer Frequency in a blistering 2-week period. And just in this interview, there's a lot of insight about where the tonal inconsistency might have come from, with John Lappin citing the Scream franchise as his main influence and Christopher Chester stating that the game was mostly influenced by movies like The Fog and Pontypool. And by the way, Chris Chester, with influences like that, you're definitely a man after my own heart. The influence of Pontypool comes in loud and clear. And I think that it might have actually been the main reason I checked out this game, as not only is Bruce McDonald's 2000 horror masterpiece a personal favorite of mine, but that movie also takes place for the entirety of its runtime inside of a radio station as callers from the outside seem to be dealing with a sudden outbreak that is rapidly cutting through the population. Pontypool does have the added weight of also taking place during a particularly nasty blizzard, so the cast is landlocked and isolated away from this threat, all while they are forced to hear about the impact that it is having on the people actually experiencing it, while simultaneously being unable to help them in any meaningful capacity. That movie, man, it is just a masterclass in laying on tension. Watch it if you haven't. And fuck man, I think that's like the 5th time, maybe even 6th that I've used the word tension in this video. Which reminds me, check out friend of the channel, Hypertension Films, if you haven't already. The dude's channel is one of the best out here on YouTube, and he covers gritty video games all the time. But yeah, the parallels between Pontypool and Killer Frequency are pretty obvious. But there seems to be a disconnect in the way that Killer Frequency deals with its catalog of different influences. Sure, the setting and inability to actually help comes in crystal clear, but the Scream influences only really act as something of a spoiler in some ways. As if you've ever seen any of those movies, especially the first and most important entry, you'll know that those films have a particular gimmick when it comes to the identity of each movie's antagonists.
We ask you a question, and if you get it wrong, booga! You die.
And so yeah, without spoiling anything too heavy, this game does eventually go down the Scream rabbit hole, as the task of identifying the killer really comes into focus during this game's third act. And while there is always a stupid joke or bad writing around the corner to undermine the best stuff in this game, there are some particularly awesome red herrings and sequences thrown your way while you are trying to piece together this game's narrative. I wanted to love Killer Frequency, honestly. I think that the concept is amazing, and there are some moments and puzzles that really stand out. But this title's grab-back approach to adopting influences and aesthetics really made some of it have that kind of hot topic vibe to it, with it feeling more like a product of pop culture instead of an entry into the culture. If you can snag a copy for cheap, I do still recommend it, as some of the things that I've outlined here as undercooked or maybe just felt annoying to me, they might not have the same impact on you. Let's just hope that someone eventually takes this concept and really runs with it one day, because there's something here, even if it didn't quite get to shine this time around. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you for watching, and it is always greatly appreciated. And if you liked the video, please consider dropping a comment, a like, or even subscribing if you want to see more. I apologize that this video took so long to come out. I've been kind of dealing with some stuff on my end. Good stuff for the most part. You know, trying to advance my career and also trying to get some big life goals realized. But I'm hoping that I will be done with all that soon and I'll be able to get back to making these videos at a more regular clip. But with all that said, I hope to see you in the next video. And until then, you're all beautiful people and I hope you all have a great day.